Hi there. I want to share a fantastic book with you. Many of you might be familiar with author Jane Smiley, who has won Pulitzer Prizes, especially for her novels about families in the Midwest. Well, she's written a completely different book. It's called Perestroika in Paris, and Perestroika is actually a racehorse who escapes from, or actually opens a gate and runs away from the track where she's been living, and meanders into Paris, where she encounters a sad dog who's lost his master and a bunch of crows and ducks and rats who are trying to survive a Paris winter on their own. And Perestroika, or Paris, is the filly. And all the rest of the animals kind of gather around to help her out because, having been a pampered racehorse, she knows nothing about surviving on her own. So it's kind of a fable, and it's very similar to Charlotte's Web in a lot of ways, and also to the kids' book, The Musicians of Bremen, and also the book and movie, The Incredible Journey. I'm making it sound like a little kid's book, but it isn't. It's sophisticated. The animals do talk to each other, but in a way that makes a lot of sense. And happily, the humans involved are very benevolent and not horrible. So I think this is ideal for reading out loud with an older child, kind of in the order of Harry Potter. But as a fiction reader, you will love it, and it stands on its own. And you can kind of sense the author's own delight in putting this together. She's known to be a big horse lover. So this was Perestroika in Paris by Jane Smiley. And she is an award-winning author who's gone in kind of a different and more whimsical direction. So the next book I'm going to recommend to you is a debut novel, a first novel by an author I had never heard of. And it's just knocked me out. It's stunning. It's got some juxtaposition of worlds that are so interesting. The book is called Saint X, and it's by Alexis Shaitkin. And it takes place on an unnamed Caribbean island where a wealthy family goes for a vacation. The teenage daughter, in a fairly standard trope, is kind of wild and disappears and is found dead. And the repercussions are on her much younger sister, Claire. So Allison is the daughter who's found dead. Claire is the younger sister, and the family is all together when this happens. And so the first part of the book takes place on the island where Allison is running with two hotel workers who seem a bit disreputable. They're black, she's white, so there's that kind of class and racial conflict. And then the action shifts to New York City, where Claire is living about 10 years after Allison's death. And she coincidentally is picked up in a cab by Clive, who is one of the workers at the hotel who is under suspicion for Allison's murder. And still not having an answer as to what happened to Allison, Claire basically stalks Clive to find out if he was guilty. So the story is told from the perspective of Allison through her diary, Claire, and also Clive. So you've got these three viewpoints. The comparisons between, or the differences between, the lush island life and the harsh life of the city are very pronounced, and make a very interesting juxtaposition between the two environments. So it's the type of book, though, from the first page you fall right into it because there's kind of a mystery there. You don't know how Allison died. That continues through most of the book, and you don't know what's going to happen to Claire and Clive. So I really highly recommend it. It's kind of riveting, like a mystery or a thriller would be, but there are deep character studies here that are very intense and make for great reading. So that's an outstanding debut novel, Saint X by Alexis Shaitkin. The next book I'm going to tell you about is a political book. And of course, in this year of all years, Political books may not be what you want to read, nor books about pandemics, but this book is actually history since the Great Depression of the interplay between government and large corporations and what has been the result of the dominance of large corporations. The book is called Evil Geniuses, The Unmaking of America, A Recent History, and it's by Kurt Anderson, who used to be one of the co-owners of Spy magazine back in the day. And he's got a great sense of humor, so it's history with humor, but it's very profoundly critical of what's happened to our country as far as lack of trust in institutions and the incredible dominance of corporations over people's lives. So the main premise of the book, though, is that we as a people are caught up in these ongoing waves of nostalgia and can't seem to truly innovate or make changes, which is a little bit of a weird premise based on, social media and everything that's happened over the last 20 years. But he makes a very good point about it. And the whole strategy of saying that Reagan's speech where he said, well, if the government comes and says, I'm here to help you run away, is really debunked. And the necessity for having a strong and competent government is really stressed here, but it's also very witty, kind of sardonic, and a great read. So this is Evil Geniuses, The Unmaking of America, A Recent History by Kurt Anderson. Okay, for my next book, I'm going to do a little bit of self-promotion because the book and author are featured on the January 2021 episode of my TV show and podcast called Book Stew. And the book is a collection of short stories, and I think it's the best short story collection of the year out of everything I've read anyway. It's called The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, and it's by Disha Philyaw. It basically does deal with the type of woman that you imagine is found in a Black church. She's got an elaborate hat on, she's judging everyone around her, she's highly influential in her family, and there are 9 stories here, but they're very varied, so there's probably a church lady or 2 in every story, but the stories feature Black women in kind of tricky situations. So there's a story where 2 women are lovers, but one of the women is longing for a husband. There's a story where 2 professionals meet at a conference and they're sizing each other up to see if they're both for real, a man and a woman. And one of the most brilliant stories, called Peach Cobbler, is about a girl growing up and thinking that the minister that visits her mother at night is really God. And then my favorite one is called Dear Sister, and it's about a girl reaching out to a woman where they have the same father and they have never met in person. So there's just a lot of fun and joy here, as well as realistic looks at lives. And I found Disha to be a wonderful interview and a lot of fun, and I think you'll enjoy watching the show. So her book is The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. It's Disha Philyaw, and I hope you'll check out the January Book Stew, which will be live as of January 1st, 2021. My next book is one that was not released this year. It's a little bit older. It's called There, There, and it's by Tommy Orange. It's an award-winning book that is all centered around a roundup or a powwow of Native Americans that happens in Oakland, California. And it's the first one that ever happens in the city. And there's great contrast here between the lives of Native Americans on reservations and the kind of hidden lives of Native American people who live in big cities and are not visible to us as Native Americans. There's a group of people who are related to each other and don't know they are, people who know they're related to each other and don't want to be, and they're all going to meet up at this big powwow. So it gives the backstories and then proceeds into the day of the powwow. It's very dramatic and beautifully written, and really basically unforgettable. I would say it's my most memorable book of the year because I haven't been able to get it out of my head in a good way. So that's There by Tommy Orange, and the title comes from the famous Gertrude Stein quote. When she was asked about Oakland, she said, well, there's no there. And that's where the title comes from. So please check out There by Tommy Orange. Certainly in all the critics' top 10 lists for 2020 is a novel called A Burning by Megha Majumdar. It's an unforgettable story of little-known populations. The heroine is Jivan, who's a young shop girl in an Indian city, but she's Muslim. And in her city, something horrible happens while she's on her way to work. Somebody throws a firebomb into a crowded commuter train and 100 people are killed. And when she gets home that night, she puts up a Facebook post, and it's read and it's commented on, and somehow she turns into a suspect in the bombing, which, I mean, she worked in basically like a Forever 21 store in a mall, so she's not political at all. And she is put in jail and awaiting trial. And she comes from a poor family. She's the first person who's kind of made it to the next rung of society. So it's very tragic. And of course, the prison is a very miserable place. But initially she has two defenders. And the first is PT Sir, so PT for physical training, her gym teacher at her high school where she was a scholarship student. He's initially in her corner. And there's also Lovely, who is a hijira, which is a third gender person or a transsexual woman who is trying to learn English because she wants to get into films, and Jivan is teaching her English. So in the beginning, when this tragedy strikes, those two are very much in her corner and helping her. But as the novel progresses, for various self-interested concerns, both of her advocates kind of fall away and stop supporting her. And that leaves her with her parents and one journalist. And throughout the tension that builds in the book, you just cannot believe that she's going to be the victim of a complete lack of justice, but it seems more and more likely as the book goes on, and I found it just hard to breathe towards the end. It's beautifully written and just gives you an amazing picture of what life is like to be a religious minority in a country where you are actively oppressed. But the writing is so beautiful, and what happens in prison, the camaraderie and the sisterhood between the women in the women's prison is really beautifully done, and sustains Jivan through her prison term. So this is also a first novel and very powerful, and that was A Burning by Megha Majumdar. Another book that I read this year that is not a 2020 book, I don't think, maybe 2019, which was a winner of the Booker Prize, is Girl, Woman, Other, and it's by Bernardine Evaristo. This is a book set in England, and it's got this interconnecting women. It's a feminist book. It's primarily a book about women, but the men in it are actually pretty well drawn, and it's not like a let's dump on men book. The male characters are peripheral, but somehow they matter. And in my review, I wrote that the stories are pungent, provocative, and pulsating with joy and with conflict. It's written in a style that's not for everybody. There are no quotation marks. The punctuation is somewhat limited, so it's kind of stream of consciousness. But there are 12 main characters, which can be hard to deal with. So what I did at the beginning is I made a map of the 12 characters and a kind of a flow chart, because as the book progresses, you come to see how all of the 12, while seemingly completely disconnected at the beginning, are completely interlaced as the book progresses. And it's really a worthy award winner, a fantastic book, lots of fun and humor, and just so cleverly written and designed. So that's Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. So in 2020, I think it was practically a requirement to learn better how to become an anti-racist. And there are certainly many, many, many books that were written by Black people for white people to kind of help them get woke, understand. The one I'm recommending here was written by a Black man for anybody, not specifically aimed at white people, and it's called What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker, a memoir in essays by Damon Young. What comes through in this book is truly genuine explanations of why there was such a strong reaction in the Black community to the death of George Floyd. Not all police brutality, but more just, the unconscious and conscious bias and the constant burden of walking out of your door in the morning and being Black as opposed to walking out of your door in the morning and being white. The chapters on his Pittsburgh upbringing and his childhood, where his family encounters setbacks that seem to me to be unique to Black families, is very, very riveting and eye-opening. And I thought the most valuable part was his discourse about the two variations and uses of the N-word and how it's used within Black culture and Black neighborhoods, and then the other side of the coin, how it's used by white people. And his premise is that it should never be used by white people, but I came to an understanding of why and how Black people do use that N-word. So one of the most interesting parts of the book is his telling about his weekly basketball games, where he plays with a bunch of white guys, probably at a YMCA. He's the only Black man who plays with them. And, he admires their court skills. They're all good players. And he realizes after 2 decades, 20 years, that he has never been in any of their homes, and nor have any of them been to his home. So the discussion of that, how you could, be with the same group of guys every week for 20 years and yet not get beyond the gym, was really revealing. So I have a good quote from this book, and the quote is, "Dad said to me, don't break yourself trying to appease white people. Martin Luther King was killed in a suit." And I think that says it all, and that's What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker, a memoir in essays by Damon Young. The next book is a necessary local favorite. So there were 2 books this year that really stood out for being located in Cambridge, Massachusetts, our beloved, what do they call it, Moscow by the Charles. The Matrimony was one that I enjoyed, but it wasn't my choice for what I'm recommending, my top choice for what I'm going to recommend to you. Instead, I'm recommending Writers and Lovers by Lily King. This is a story about a woman who has had a terrible death in her family, a breakup, and is just struggling to get by. She wants to write. She's living in the potting shed of a grand house in Cambridge that a kind of a jerky guy has let her live in for a outrageous rent to live in a potting shed. And she's working in a very fancy restaurant in Harvard Square, which is probably Harvest or one of those type of restaurants. And she's dealing with the restaurant staff, the owner of the restaurant, and she's also trying to write a book, get past the death of her mother. And she spends a lot of time walking by the Charles and thinking aloud, and it's just so Cambridgey. and it's so beautiful, and the character is so appealing. So, you know, I feel like when we can all go out again and talk to people without masks, that she's going to be there, and I'll just, you know, go into the Harvest restaurant and ask for her by name, though of course she won't be. The author's name is Lily King, and the book is called Writers and Lovers. Totally, totally enjoyable story. So in and amongst the favorites of the year should be one romantic crowd pleaser, light romantic crowd pleaser. And for me, that was the book Every Drake Starts Over by Linda Holmes. It's set in Maine, mid-coast Maine, and it's the story of a woman who's seemingly marries a man she's in love with who's a doctor, and he turns out to be a complete jerk. And she ends up kicking him out of the house, and she's living in the house on the mid-coast and kind of trying to figure out what to do with herself. And meantime, in New York City, there's a baseball player, a pitcher, who for some reason gets a terrible case of what's called the yips. Suddenly he cannot pitch anymore to save his life. He has no control over his pitches. He goes from being an excellent pitcher to being someone who can't even hold down a job. And because they have a friend in common, you know, that's the setup, he needs to get out of New York City, where he's being eviscerated by the press and by the fans. And she has a little kind of adjoining guest cottage to her house. And through the machinations of their mutual friend, the baseball player comes and becomes her tenant. And of course, as soon as he moves in, you know what's going to happen. And it does happen, but it happens in a kind of a twisty way, and it happens in a very slow and gradual way where you're not exactly sure of how everything's going to turn out. But it's really just, it's the happiest book I read this year as far as pure happiness goes. There's conflict, and there's her issues, and there's his issues, which are really terrible, you know, the loss of your career while you're in the middle of it, and especially being so publicly visible. But it's a treat all the way through is the best way I can put it. And that's Every Drake Starts Over by Linda Holmes. Okay, so I know I promised 10 books, top 10 books of the year, but I had to put in an 11th. And the 11th I'm putting in is more for the author than for this specific book. I feel like I discovered this author on my own, which of course is not true, but I think I had a review of one of her earlier books, and I just had it by my computer, and it sat there for years and years and years. And then she finally wrote a new book, and I grabbed the new book and I loved it. And then I went back and read her old catalog. So this author, to me, her name is Carol Ann Shaw. And the most recent book that I loved was called Carrie the One. In all her books, she's able to pull together friends and family and take outrageous circumstances and build stories on them. So you care not as much about the tragedy as you do about the aftermath and how people are going to work their way through things. And most of her books do feature one kind of horrendous event, and the before the event, the horrendous event, and then what happens afterwards. So in this book, there's 3 siblings, Alice, Nick, and Carmen, and they are attending a wedding. And after the wedding, they get in a car together with other people, and the driver is drunk, and they hit a little girl on the road, and it's awful. But then they still have to, after tragedies like this, people don't usually just all commit mass suicide. Like, you have to live with it and learn to work your way through it, as we know everyone is doing in this year for sure. And how Alice, Nick, and Carmen and the people that they're involved with work their way through the aftermath of this is very, very heart-wrenching and yet heart uplifting at the same time, that tragedies can be overcome. So Alice becomes a famous artist later on. Carmen's husband divorces her and runs off with a missionary, which was a missionary woman, which was weird. And Nick is an astronomer, and he has a secret about the accident, and he's the one who ends up at the most devastating outcome. But being told through the eyes of these three siblings, and I like books that have brothers and sisters in them. I just think they're fun. So my favorite quote from this book was, "It was not a good situation when the same person provided the pain and the analgesic," which I thought was a wonderful way of stating that one person is really the center of everything. So my author for you to discover, once again, is Carol Anshaw, and her recent book is called Carrie the One.